Dale Ruplinger was an American bodybuilder born on February 18, 1953, and his name holds a very special place in the history of bodybuilding. He wasn't known just for titles, but for representing a type of athlete who was extremely focused, methodical, and obsessed with excellence. From early on, his journey stood out because of the intensity with which he approached every decision related to the sport. In the early 1980s, Dale emerged as one of the biggest names in amateur bodybuilding worldwide. In an era defined by massive physiques and fierce competition, he managed to stand out quickly. While many were chasing sheer size, Ruplinger built a physique designed to win on stage, balancing aesthetics, razor-sharp definition, and strong stage presence. What truly defined Dale was the rare combination of flawless symmetry, extreme conditioning, and an almost obsessive competitive mindset. Nothing in his preparation was left to chance. Every workout, every meal, and every detail of his body served a clear purpose: to reach the highest possible level in the sport. During his youth and high school years, nothing suggested that Dale Ruplinger would become an elite bodybuilder. He didn't lift weights, didn't train in gyms, and wasn't involved in any strength-based competitive sports. Unlike many champions, his foundation didn't come from early bodybuilding, but from a constant feeling that he still hadn't found his true path. After finishing school, Dale went through several ordinary jobs, with long hours and little personal fulfillment. They paid the bills, but didn't satisfy that inner drive to stand out in something bigger. He knew he had potential, believed he could be great in a sport, but simply didn't know yet which sport that would be. That feeling of restlessness peaked when Dale turned 24 in 1978. He was searching for purpose, identity, and something he could truly call his own. It wasn't instant fame or money he was after, but the chance to fully commit to something individual, where success would depend solely on his own effort. The turning point came quietly, but it changed everything. Dale received a book from his father called Winning Bodybuilding. That single read flipped a switch. Within hours, he saw in bodybuilding exactly what he had been looking for: an individual sport, brutally demanding, built on absolute discipline. And here's the most striking part. Before he ever touched a barbell, Dale told his family and friends that he would become Mr. Iowa, Mr. USA, and Mr. America. Many laughed. Some thought it was exaggerated, others called it crazy. But that statement wasn't arrogance, it was conviction. From his very first workout, Dale Ruplinger made it clear he wasn't there just to change his appearance or feel better physically. The goal was much bigger: winning championships. While many people trained for motivation or looks, Dale treated bodybuilding as a life project. He spent hours every day studying weight training, nutrition, and physiology, trying to truly understand how the human body worked. It's important to remember the context of that time. There was no internet, no social media, and no easy access to information. Magazines and a handful of specialized books were all that existed, and Dale consumed that material as if it were sacred manuals. His diet followed the same extreme logic. Strict, repetitive, and often unpleasant meal plans were part of daily life. Supplementation was primitive by today's standards, often involving bad-tasting products with limited effectiveness, but he followed everything to the letter. To support his dream of becoming a champion, Dale completely reorganized his life. He adjusted his work schedule so everything revolved around bodybuilding, spending over 15 years working at Alcoa. The job wasn't the end goal, but the means that allowed him to maintain discipline, stability, and total focus on the sport. Even before the workday began, Dale was already training at the Davenport YMCA, in a room known among lifters as the Dungeon. The name wasn't an exaggeration. It was hot, poorly ventilated, heavy, and completely uncomfortable. Exactly the kind of place only the most committed athletes stuck with. For him, that environment was part of the process. His routine included double training sessions that could add up to nearly 3 hours a day of intense weightlifting. And the work didn't stop when he left the gym. At home, he spent even more time studying, reading everything he could find about training, diet, recovery, and the inner workings of the human body. The strength numbers helped put that level of dedication into perspective. Dale squatted 635 pounds, about 288 kilograms, benched 435 pounds, roughly 197 kilograms, and performed behind-the-neck presses with 275 pounds, which is around 125 kilograms. Those weren't just impressive lifts. They reflected the mindset of someone who treated every aspect of training with absolute seriousness. Throughout his development as an athlete, Dale Ruplinger looked for inspiration that went far beyond raw muscle size. He admired physiques like Frank Zane's, the ultimate symbol of symmetry and aesthetics, as well as Arnold Schwarzenegger's, famous for dominant stage presence and a championship mindset. In Dale's eyes, the perfect champion had to merge those two worlds into one complete package. One of the most defining moments of that phase came when he decided to travel to attend an Arnold seminar in the 1970s. When he arrived, he noticed something unexpected. There were very few people there. That allowed for a much closer, almost personal interaction with the biggest name in bodybuilding at the time. For Dale, that experience was a true turning point. From that moment on, he gradually built a close relationship with Arnold over the years. Whenever he had the chance, he attended seminars, asked questions, took notes, and sought direct advice. He wasn't there just to watch. He was there to learn everything he could. But not all of his influences came from legendary champions. One of the most powerful lessons of his life came from a training partner who lost a leg to cancer and still returned to the gym with an incredibly positive attitude. While most people would have quit, he came back to train. No complaints, no self-pity. That moment completely changed the way Dale viewed effort and hardship. From that point on, he made a personal decision. He would never complain about a bad workout or a tough day again. In a time frame that feels almost unreal, Dale Ruplinger went from absolute zero to the best physical condition of his life. It took roughly 2.5 years from his first real contact with weight training to reaching a competitive level that many athletes never achieve, even after decades in the sport. That speed made it clear that something extraordinary was happening. With every competition, Dale proved he wasn't just another promising name. Each time he stepped on stage, he was more conditioned, more confident, and better prepared than before. The progress wasn't gradual, it was aggressive, obvious, and impossible for judges and fans to ignore. The first major results came quickly. In 1980, he won the Mr. Iowa title, fulfilling one of the promises he had made before he even started training. The following year, in 1981, he claimed the Mr. Central States title, confirming that his rise wasn't luck, but the direct result of an exceptionally well-executed preparation. But 1982 went down in history as the perfect year. In that single season, Dale won the NPC Nationals in the middleweight division, captured the NPC USA Championships both in his class and the overall, and then went on to win the IFBB World Amateur Championships, once again as a middleweight. 3 massive victories across different organizations in the same year. The year 1982 permanently etched Dale Ruplinger's name into the history of world bodybuilding. In a sequence that still feels unbelievable, he accomplished something that remains unique to this day, winning Mr. USA, Mr. America, and Mr. Universe all in the same year. It wasn't coincidence. It was the peak of a plan executed with absolute precision. Each of those titles alone would have been enough to define an entire career. But Dale didn't stop at 1, or even 2. He won Mr. USA, confirmed his dominance at Mr. America, and then took on the biggest challenge in amateur bodybuilding, the IFBB Mr. Universe. This time, the entire world would be watching. The competition was held in Belgium and brought together athletes from 83 different countries, all champions in their home nations. Even facing that insane level of competition, Dale stepped on stage without fear. His physique stood out for its balance, density, and above all, an abdominal definition that would become legendary. At that moment, Dale weighed about 173.5 pounds, approximately 78.7 kilograms. He wasn't the biggest athlete on stage, but he was by far the most complete. The result was historic. He received the only perfect score ever recorded at the Mr. Universe, 1,000 points. No other competitor had ever achieved that before. After winning Mr. Universe, Dale Ruplinger took the next natural step. He became a professional bodybuilder. But that transition came with an immediate reality check. The pro scene was far more extreme, brutally competitive, and uneven, filled with athletes who were significantly bigger and prepared for an entirely different level of physical demand. Right in his pro debut, Dale found himself facing some of the biggest names in the world. In 1983, he competed at the Grand Prix England, finishing in 8th place. Shortly after that, he stepped onto the most famous stage in the sport, the Mr. Olympia in Munich, where he placed 12th. For a recently turned pro coming from the amateur ranks, those results already showed he could hold his own. Still, it didn't take long for Dale to realize that the standard had changed. Professional bodybuilding at that time was moving toward physiques that were bigger, denser, and more extreme than ever before. The refined aesthetics that had carried him to the top of the amateur world now had to compete against truly massive muscle volume. To try to keep up with this new level, Dale pushed his training even harder. The weights went up, and so did the pressure. Under medical supervision, he began using anabolic steroids, something that was extremely common at the time and largely unregulated within the sport. In 1984, while still trying to establish himself as a professional, Dale Ruplinger faced the toughest moment of his entire career. During a phase of brutally intense training, just as results were starting to show, he suffered a complete rupture of his right biceps. For many athletes, that kind of injury would have meant the immediate end of a career. The initial diagnosis was devastating. Even after surgery, doctors told him his arm would never look or perform the same again. For a bodybuilder, especially one obsessed with symmetry and proportion, that verdict felt almost impossible to overcome. But Dale refused to accept that fate. With the same mindset that had taken him to the top of amateur bodybuilding, he began an intense process of physical reconstruction. Training, rehabilitation, and adaptation became his new daily routine. Slowly, something that seemed impossible started to happen. The outcome was shocking even by the standards of that era. Dale rebuilt his arms and eventually reached an incredible 22 inches, about 56 centimeters, making them the largest in the sport at the time. It was a result that defied medical expectations and reinforced his reputation for extreme discipline. Years later, Dale openly acknowledged that the injury was directly linked to performance-enhancing drug use. He never tried to hide it or romanticize what happened. After a long and exhausting recovery process, Dale Ruplinger returned to the stage, but the landscape was no longer the same. His body had been pushed to extreme limits, and his perspective on the sport had changed as well. After the injury, he competed only 2 more times on the professional circuit, fully aware that this chapter of his life was nearing its end. The most symbolic and emotional return came in 1986 at the IFBB Night of the Champions. For many, it was just another contest. For Dale, it marked the closing of an entire chapter. Simply being back on stage after everything he had endured already felt like a personal victory. Even without placing near the top, Dale described that moment as one of the most intense experiences of his life. It wasn't about trophies, rankings, or applause anymore. It was about proving to himself that he could come back, that he hadn't been defeated by injury or by the circumstances that nearly ended his career too soon. At that point, he realized he had already achieved everything he needed to achieve. The titles, the sacrifices, and the experiences had all served their purpose. There was no longer a reason to keep pushing his body in an environment that was becoming more extreme and further removed from what had drawn him to bodybuilding in the first place. Dale ended his competitive career with a clear sense that he had lived through what many called the golden era of bodybuilding. With time and distance, Dale Ruplinger began to look at bodybuilding in a much more critical and reflective way. In his view, the sport changed dramatically and drifted away from what once made it special. The balance between aesthetics, symmetry, and presentation, once highly valued, slowly faded into the background. Dale often says that the excessive focus on size turned bodybuilding into something almost unrecognizable. Bigger and bigger physiques started winning, even when proportion and harmony were clearly sacrificed. Another point he openly criticizes is the modern narrative around so-called clean athletes. For someone who lived through an era with little to no regulation and never hid his choices, that stance feels hypocritical. Dale believes today's discourse often ignores the sport's historical reality and creates an illusion that's hard to sustain. Even when speaking frankly about performance-enhancing drug use in his era, Dale makes it clear he has no regrets. He understands the context he was in and accepts the decisions he made to compete at the highest level. There's no shame and no attempt to rewrite the past. After stepping away from competition, Dale Ruplinger didn't leave bodybuilding. He simply changed how he lived the sport. Today, he works as an independent personal trainer at Gold's Gym, helping everyday people build health, strength, and a better quality of life. The focus is no longer the stage, but real, sustainable results. For Dale, one of the greatest rewards of his career wasn't a trophy, it was respect. He deeply values the credibility he built through years of discipline, study, and hands-on experience. When he talks about training and the human body, people listen, not because of fame, but because they trust someone who actually lived it. Bodybuilding was always present in his family as well. Brothers and cousins won state-level titles, creating a true family tradition tied to the sport. Even so, Dale carries a quiet disappointment. He was never inducted into the local sports Hall of Fame. Ironically, he walks past those halls almost every day, without public resentment. To him, external recognition matters far less than what he already accomplished. In the end, Dale Ruplinger knows exactly the weight of his legacy. He made history, lived at the peak of an era, and left his name permanently etched into the world of bodybuilding. Dale Ruplinger's story goes far beyond titles and trophies. It represents the power of absolute discipline, unbreakable focus, and a winning mindset built day after day. Nothing in his journey was improvised. Every achievement came from hard choices, repeated consistently over years. Dale symbolizes a time in bodybuilding when symmetry, conditioning, and passion for the sport came before excess. A time when stepping on stage was about celebrating the process, not just chasing placements. His journey reminds us that the physique is only the visible reflection of something much deeper. The most powerful part of this story is realizing that great champions aren't born ready. They're shaped through obsession, sacrifice, and a clear vision of where they want to go, even when no one else believes. Dale decided who he would be before he ever started and spent his entire life proving it through action. If this story inspired you in any way, hit the like button now. It really helps the channel keep bringing deep stories like this. If you're not subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to support the channel even more, become a member and join our community. Now don't go anywhere. Another special video is already popping up on the end screen, directly connected to this story and the golden era of bodybuilding. Click it and keep this journey going with us. See you in the next video.